You may have heard it said, set it and forget it, but it's really more like an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure when it comes to taking care of your house. This is the real story with Adam and Sherry. I'm Adam Hamalian,
And I'm Sherry Hutchens.
and this is where two brokers tell real estate stories from 35 years of business in Contra Costa County, mainly for our clients, some for our colleagues, and really just because we love hanging out with each other. So, Sherry, why don't we start with a market update? What's going on this week?
Well, we've got some big changes ahead. We get all new forms tomorrow that are going to change the way we do business. And lots of changes coming up until we get to the big date in August on the 17th. We've talked about that in our last podcast, but market. Well, you and I were out showing houses on Sunday afternoon. It was really hot.
Really hot.
Really hot, yeah, I was crabby. Um, we showed 5 houses, and, all of the houses were being held open by the listing agent, and it was interesting to hear each of them give us the opinion about how busy they were, and a couple of them said, "I don't know, I think the market's changing, it seems like it's slowing down," and a couple others were saying, "Oh my gosh, I think the market is just gonna take off, it seems really busy." And what do you think that was all about?
Well, the interesting thing is that we knew all the agents. Either one was from our company and others we've done transactions with. These were
Yeah,
not inexperienced people who were making these comments.
no,
And
not
I
at
think that it was really indicative, partially, I shouldn't say really indicative, partially affected by the quality of the homes that they were showing that day. The
yeah,
ones that were really well prepared and looked great, where somebody can move into, and on one exception, had really great photos online. I think those were getting lots of traffic. There was
yeah.
one house we went to that had great photos online, but when we got there, it was quite disappointing.
Oh
Um,
gosh, is that the truth?
yeah, I mean, it is our job as real estate agents to make a house look as good as it can be, and this agent and photographer really did a good job.
Yeah,
Um, and they did their job well, but it wasn't a good fit for our clients.
no. We were looking at about the $1.5 million price range in 2 different cities, Pleasant Hill and Walnut Creek. And interesting enough, the first house that we looked at on Mohawk, beautiful home, beautiful yard, amazing setting. And it was probably the least busy of all the homes that we looked at that day. And it had been sitting on the market for 10 days, which, if you're listening to this from outside of the area, you're going to think 10 days, that's a long time, but 10 days is a long time, especially for a house that was that well put together. So
Yeah,
it'll be interesting to see. Our clients liked a couple of them, but they weren't quite,
including that one.
including that one. Yes, one half of the couple liked that one, the other half of the couple liked a different one. So needless to say, they've got they're not ready to jump in, but we will show them more houses, and one of these days we will find that one for them. So
Yeah,
that's the market.
yeah, that house was really beautiful. I mean, it had all the finishes and tastes that I would like.
Yeah.
And I'm at an age where I start to wonder whether do I have old persons in, has it moved past the younger generation? This couple is our age between you and I, and so I think we all like the same thing. But part of me wonders, is that a generational observation? Um, testing the market out is always, it's always shifting.
Well, it was definitely my favorite house, and it's a house that you could age in place for a really long time.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, that's kind of brings us into our topic for the day. Not so much the fit and finishes of a house, but there is something about preparing a house, and we often will make recommendations for repairs at the time of sale. And there's sometimes where I wish that if homeowners had been paying attention to something along the way, they would have avoided having to have a big cash outflow or make a decision about doing a bigger repair when they got ready for sale.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that you've noticed when we get a house ready for sale that, boy, maybe a little bit of maintenance would have saved some people some more money?
Can I give some context for this by saying that When I first got into the business, one of the things that was required on every listing was a termite inspection. And it wasn't just informational, like, gee, I wonder what's going on with the house. We literally had to send it to the lender and say, here's what's going on with the house. And the seller had to complete the section 1 repairs. And section 1 is an active infestation of a wood destroying pest, and houses are made of wood mostly. And you want to protect the structural integrity of a home. And if lenders are going to loan on a home, they want to make sure it's going to be there 30 years from now when the loan gets paid off. I mean, is that too simple? Is oversimplifying? I don't know.
No, I think it's, it's part of that equation. We used to hear people say, this house has good bones. Well, part of that having good bones was the bones didn't have deterioration from termites or dry rot. And
Exactly.
the lenders, yeah, we don't want to lend on something that has bad bones. And so they were protecting the client, but also protecting their investment.
Protecting their investment. And at some point around 2005 or 6, that went away. And we were no longer showing lenders, required to show lenders inspection reports. And what happened at that point was any section 1 items that came up on an inspection were negotiable between a buyer and seller. And as it became more and more a seller's market, buyers were taking the house as is. And I think to a large degree, homes were not getting that section 1 work done. So how's that for context?
Yeah. Well, while we're on that, I mean, I do think that, in that run up to the crash when the market was really out of control and in an unhealthy way, which led to the crash.
Yeah.
Um, it's sad that that little practice went by the wayside, and partly because it kept killing deals, right? That, buyers were just hungry to get into whatever house they could, and they did not want this hurdle of the pest and termite report to get in the way. So collectively as a market, we stopped doing it. And consequently, that we lost that kind of as a protection for the buyers. And in some markets, that's not a big deal, but in California, it really is. And it's
Yeah.
sad that that's one of the things that has gone away from a home quality point of view. Obviously, a transaction is one more thing. Um,
And I think buyers thought, oh, I'll take care of it later. But as you and I know very well, we go through a transaction with a client. They learn a lot about a house while we're in contract, as we're doing inspections. And then at the close of escrow, we hand them a set of keys and send them off into their home. And oftentimes times it's, first time buyers. And there is no education whatsoever about how to take care of their house. They just move in and start living there.
yeah,
And I guess that brings us to our topic today, which is deferred maintenance.
yeah. And actually, before we jump into it, I was thinking about one other thing we were talking about in prep. Wanted to point out that when a house changes hands, that transaction, a lot of work often gets done in preparation for the sale, or the buyer does some work to it after they take possession.
Yeah.
Partially because it's easier to do some things like flooring when there's no furniture in the house, or painting and that sort of thing. And then sometimes it's just all those things are brought to the attention while the home buyer is looking at it, investigating. You have this whole list of things that aren't quite right or actually wrong. And that might be a repair, or it might be something that was done wrong and doing a remodel. And so when houses change hands, they actually get essentially upgraded a little bit. And so if somebody's been in a home for 40 years, even if they're good at maintenance, there's often things that just haven't been taken care of that homeowners just learn to live with, right? I mean, that I have this little piece of trim that isn't painted in my house. It hasn't been painted for like 20 plus years when I did my major remodel. And my wife's not happy about this. She has not acquiesced about it. She every once in a while politely says, "Hey, I wonder if we're going to take care of that." And she says it in a very charming way, but it's also like, yeah, you just kind of your inertia just doesn't get it done.
Well, you've heard me say many times, Sherry's rule of you can get used to anything,
Yeah.
and you can get used to anything. I mean,
Sometimes that's not a good thing.
exactly. I mean, I've had clients say, well, the minute I move in, I am taking that ugly ceiling fan out, and because I can't live with it like that. And 10 years later, we sell that
Yeah,
house and that ceiling fan is still there.
yeah, yeah.
But
Well,
there's Things you shouldn't get used to.
Yeah, there are some things that, as a homeowner, you have this huge investment in your house. It's your single investment for most people in their portfolio. And keeping its value is tied to how well you maintain it. And it's not necessarily, remodeling to keep up with what's fashionable, but it's just keeping those bones strong. So, um, back to where we were about like 5 minutes ago before we did all this preamble. What are some of the things that we see when we're getting ready to work with sellers that end up being a bigger expense than if they had done some better maintenance along the way?
Yep. So one of the things that we always recommend to sellers when we're prepping a home for sale is before they do anything else to do pre-sale home inspections, home termite and a roof, a pool if they've got one, sometimes a chimney, so that we can evaluate the condition of the house and then give them advice on where to invest their money, whether it's for repairs or whether it's for improvements. And I think the thing that we see more often than anything else is fungus, or commonly known as dry rot, which is a Section 1 item, and it is deterioration of wood members on the house, both exterior and under the house. And if you're able to see within walls or like in an attic rafter, the condition of the wood there. I think that's the most common.
Yeah. And so the pest inspection is, I mean, the damage from that termites and slower with fungus aren't things that typically happen overnight. They are things that take years to develop.
Yeah.
I mean, the fungus obviously can start in any one season, but typically, if you catch it early, it's a pretty simple repair to take care of.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that when we look at it, so section structural pest inspectors are allowed to give a bid for fixing the problem. And so those bids can range anywhere from $500 to I think 35,000 is the largest I've ever seen.
Me too.
Um, and kind of
Yeah.
my feeling is that if it's about 5,000 or less for a home that's 50 years old, that feels manageable.
Mhm.
And those repairs are often found like the along the ridge line or a barge rafter on the edge of the roof where they're exposed to the rain. The roof covering doesn't quite cover them all the way,
Yep.
and those are pretty typical. Um, what are some other places where we see some typical damage that show up on the pest report?
On window trim, door trim on the exterior, when you have a T111 siding and it is at the bottom of the side of the house, and possibly even having earth to wood or siding contact. And even sometimes if you've got a misdirected sprinkler head hitting a side of a portion of the wood siding, you'll start to see fungus. We should probably explain what fungus is. Fungus is caused by water. It's a living organism. And as long as it stays wet and moist, it continues to eat away at the wood. As you said, Adam, it takes a really long time to actually see the damage. And when the rain stops in, March or April, and we don't have any rain again until October or November, or sometimes December, that fungus goes dormant. But the minute it gets wet again, it continues to destroy the wood. So people don't realize that water really is the biggest enemy of the house. More often than not, people are concerned about termites. Termites are not a big deal. It's the water that's doing
Yeah,
damage to your house.
yeah,
Termites are easy to treat.
yeah. The kind of irony is that um, actually, if some of wood stayed wet, it would be a little bit slower. It's the wet dry cycle that's the worst. So being wet is not okay. It'll still grow that way, but it actually, when it goes dormant, when it comes back the next winter, it comes back like, oh, we've been hungry all summer. We're ready for this, and they wake up and they go gangbusters.
Yeah.
The other couple places where water are present in a house are places around your bathtub where you have caulking that might not be properly done or being deteriorated, a loose toilet, so a toilet seat that rocks a little bit when you sit down on it, and of course under sinks, kitchen and bathroom sinks. And all of these areas can be, the maintenance around all these things can save you from having that wet cycle or wet dry cycle, from just expanding. So, for instance, the cost to clean out the grout around your bathtub and where the bathtub meets the floor and recaulk it might cost you $20 a year. You wouldn't want to do it every year, but if you did it, and if you did it yourself, maybe if you hired somebody, it might cost you a little bit more. But if that water gets down in the crack between the floor and the bathtub or around the surround, that could easily be a 5,000, or if you have tile or a really nice surround, $15,000 repair.
Yeah.
Where if you just every year take a look around and see where does it look like the caulking is not making a good seal, clean it out. It might even be looking moldy anyway because of whatever you're using. But
Yeah.
that's a good example of where the doing that little small repair can save you a lot of money.
Yeah. Yeah. How about under the house when it's rainy and you don't have proper drainage and all of a sudden there's water accumulating under your house and you've got wood foundation,
Yeah.
right?
So the moisture under the house is really kind of a complicated um condition. The ground is just because the ground is moist isn't automatically a bad thing, and you may not be able to avoid it because it rains 20 feet away. The ground is like a sponge. Unless you're going to have a vapor barrier or a moisture barrier go down 10 feet into the ground underneath the house is going to be moist in the winter in most locations.
Yeah.
So what are ways that we can mitigate that? Um, because what you don't want is to have the water come out of the soil and condense on the underneath side of the floor. And that's how you end up with surface fungus, which then can lead to a dry rot situation. So you want to keep the moisture from coming out of the ground into the air. And there's several different ways that, depending on your context, that you can take care of it. So one is you could put down uh, plastic, like a plastic tarp, over the earth, and that keeps the water will condensate on the underneath of that and stay in the ground, won't come up in the airspace. More typically, we have vents around the perimeter of a raised foundation that allows the air when the wind blows to blow in from one side of the house through underneath the house out the other side. And there's all sorts of requirements on the number of vents. That can be a really good way to do it, but oftentimes insulation is blocking some of those vents, or on the outside, ground cover gets pushed up against the house and blocks those vents. So it's another part of maintenance then is to go around and make sure that insulation hasn't been pulled down and the outside ground cover isn't in the way of it. And that can even, cut down the density of bushes around the house so that the wind can blow through it.
Yep.
The third thing is a little bit more expensive and invasive, and that is a French drain. Do you want to talk about French drains?
Um, well, I'm probably not as qualified to talk about them as you, but I know what they are. They go around the perimeter of the house and you dig a big trench and you put, I think, PVC pipe in it that has holes in it, right?
Yep.
Fill it with gravel and then put the dirt back on the top and and all those PVC pipes, I think, divert to drains that go out to the street. Am I
Yep.
right?
You're absolutely right.
Okay.
The one exception is that sometimes you don't get to drain it out to the street, depending on where the house is. Right, you can't drain it up to a street for a house that's below street level, and so oftentimes, so I'll use my house as an example. My house is below the street level, and I collect not only a French drain around the perimeter, but I also collect the drain pipes from the roof, the rain gutters, into two separate systems, but they eventually come together and they go to my backyard about 25, 30 feet from the house, where we dug a huge pit, filled it with rock, and the water drains into that underground basin essentially. And so the idea here is to take all of that moisture that's right around the house and take it away from the house so it's harder for that moisture to get underneath.
Yeah.
Um, one of the interesting things about the French drains is people often either they don't know what the system is when they buy a house, or they don't, even if they did it themselves, they don't know where the water is going and they don't know how to maintain it.
Mhm.
And for the most part, these can last 20 plus years. without even thinking about them. But you can extend their life by flushing them out, or sometimes if you're the kind of person who likes to use a herbicide, you can to kill roots that may be intrusive.
Mhm.
I mean, the way they're built to be protected from invasive roots, but roots get in the smallest cracks, and so killing the roots so that it opens up. And or if you have one that drains out to a street, you can flush it with water similar to you might with your house sewer line, and make sure that it's still free. That water is actually getting away from the house. Um,
Do you
and
remember house? I'm sorry, go ahead.
while I'm at it, just kind of tied to that system is you need to clean out your roof gutters
Oh,
periodically too, because you don't want those filling up with water for a lot of reasons. But mainly that you don't want that collecting water right near the end of your roof rafters where that moisture can cause problems.
one of the things that we do when we show houses that's a little bit different from many agents is instead of walking through the house and going, "Isn't this a pretty house? Look at those appliances." We tend to point out things that a buyer needs to be aware of, including things like, "Oh, look, these downspouts empty into a drain. The drain, who knows where it goes, but it looks like somebody's put it in a drainage system." And we start to educate the clients as they're looking at homes, so they can evaluate, whether it's something that's important to them that they might not have ever even thought
Yeah.
about. But it also makes me think that as we do our walkthrough at close of escrow, maybe we need to have a little, some other conversation like, don't forget to clean your gutters out and don't forget to flush your drains. And you need to have a termite inspection every 2 years. Don't wait till you sell your house in 25 years, and just kind of change the way we do our walkthrough.
Yeah. Well, because taking care of a home, not everybody. I mean, I grew up in a house where my dad was very handy. He managed some proper rental properties, so he was always fixing things, and I learned at his knee how to take care of stuff. And he was a Depression era baby, so he was the kind of guy he would straighten a nail or would replace a washer rather than replacing a faucet. And I don't think everybody grows up with a mentor like that
Yeah.
teaches you how to do all those little things,
Yeah.
things that help you. You can replace a washer and a faucet for 20 cents rather than replace the whole faucet for $50, depending on what quality you're getting.
Yeah.
And it's a simple kind of home ownership where you're keeping the thing working at its best. It's like, you take your car in to have its oil changed, every 3 to 5 thousand miles. Your house is a bigger investment and needs that kind of attention. And I think that probably be, as you're saying, it's got to begin with us as real estate agents of, hey, we helped you buy it. Here's some advice on how to keep it.
Yeah, absolutely. What would you check on an annual basis on a house?
Well, I mean, there's the simple things like obviously checking if you still have batteries in your smoke detectors and carbon monoxide detectors. Now those tend to be 10-year sealed batteries. Changing the air filters on your HVAC system, and your air handling, the part that's outside the house, make sure it's not covered with leaves and it has ventilation all the way around it. I would check to make sure that leaves and other things like that have not been pushed up against the house, that
Mhm.
you have 4 to 6 inches clear between the lowest piece of wood and the ground, so that there's no risk of water whisking up into the structure and creating some dry rot that way.
Yep.
Personally, I climb on my roof every year. Um, after having a heart attack and a hip replacement, I might have to think about paying somebody to do that. But
I was just
uh, there's some things that I do regularly on my roof. So I have some shady spots due to some tree cover that never fully dry out, and so a little bit of moss tends to grow on it. So I brush that off to keep it from growing up and getting underneath the shingles, opening it up for water to get in there. So I'll clean that out. Obviously, I mentioned cleaning the gutters out every fall.
yeah.
Um, uh, and I will walk around. It's not really a roof inspection, but I'll just look and see if does does there look like there's anything that's not working right. Every once in a while, I'll see like a nail that's worked its way up,
Mhm.
which needs to be then taken out and sealed with some Henry's roofing tar, which is a super fun, messy thing to do.
Oh,
Um, Uh, and I think you just I haven't crawled underneath my house in a long time. I probably should do that once in a while and just or pay someone to go down there and take a look around to make sure that I'm not hosting the local raccoon family or something.
No, I'm hosting the
Oh,
local.
that's right. There at your house, you have the wildlife in your
Yes,
backyard.
they're living under my deck right now.
Yeah. I think, and then like I mentioned earlier, taking a look around your sink and bathtubs and showers for caulking to make sure that those are still in good condition and there's not a chance of water leaking, and looking underneath your closet or underneath the sinks to see if there's any leaks going on. Places where there often is trouble is a P trap can rust out, even if it's metal. Um, and so just check on the quality of those. I usually touch the bottom of the pea, and if it feels soft, then it's replace it before it starts leaking. And yeah, those are the main things I would do.
Sounds like we need to do a checklist for our clients. Well,
I
once we
guess I
list,
guess
and
I should write that up, or we just send them this video.
I think exactly. I
Yeah.
also watch for standing water around the house during the rainy season. Do you remember the house we sold on Willow a couple of years
Oh,
ago
that was horrible.
that had what, 10 inches of standing water in the backyard?
Yeah.
No
They
exaggeration.
they were below the street and below their backyard neighbor. The water had no place to go.
Yeah, I've never seen anything like that.
Yeah.
Uh, Nor have I seen a real estate agent, hook up a hose and run a sump pump out. I think he had to run it all the way out to Olympic,
I
right?
had to run it past the neighbor's house because otherwise it would have gone onto his property, which is totally illegally. So I had to run it past his house to the storm drain. Yeah, a whole house away.
It seemed like every time you got that backyard drained, it would rain again and then it would fill up with water again. Thank goodness for disclosures. Uh,
Yes.
We took pictures. The buyer was well aware of the issue. I drive by that house all the time on my travels, and I often wonder if they've ever done anything about that. Hopefully they have.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
well,
So,
well, good.
um,
We've covered
yeah,
a lot
there's
of territory here.
we did, yeah. I mean, we mainly covered water and those sorts of things. There's lots of other home maintenance things that are important, like abating for fires. We'll do that, cover that probably in another podcast. But certainly, these are the things that are most important for keeping your house from having to battle dry
Mhm.
rot or major termite repairs. And I would totally advocate in doing intermediate home and termite inspections, more so the termite inspection. The last one I had done at my house was, I think, 4 years ago, and it's probably time for me to do it again. Um, just to, it's easier to pay a couple $100s for the inspection and take care of the small repairs before they become major.
Yeah, I agree. We need to have our friend James from Wallace Termite come on and talk to us more about this. And one other thing is you mentioned fire. If you aren't calling your insurance agent once a year to make sure that you have proper coverage on your home in case of fire, you should be doing that. There are a lot of people that were underinsured during the Oakland Hills fires in 1992. And when they went to rebuild their house, they found out that they didn't have enough insurance to cover a new house. So
Yeah.
you should be doing every year.
Yeah, yeah, having that inflation clause in your policy is a really good idea, and reviewing all of your policies with your agent doesn't cost you money to review it. So,
No, not at all. So
yeah.
we'll work on that checklist.
All right, sounds good. Well, I think that that's it for this week's episode of The Real Story with Adam and Sherry. We're so glad you came to join us. If you enjoyed it, please like it and subscribe and recommend us to your friends and family. I guess that's it for today. All right.
Thanks, everybody.
We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.